Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about appositives and how to punctuate appositives. Now, first off, appositives are words or phrases that add information to a sentence and they rename the subject or object of a sentence. And generally speaking, they might even be able to replace the subject or object of a sentence. The important part there that I really want you to focus on, though, is that appositives, their function is to add information into a sentence. And specifically, we're adding usually extra information. Sometimes it's necessary, though. And that difference between extra and necessary is going to be really important to us. So here's an example. Our neighbor, the deli manager at Giant Foods, used to own a restaurant. Now, in this sentence, the underlined portion is the appositive, and that underlined portion adds extra information to our sentence. We could just say, our neighbor used to own a restaurant, and that would make sense. But what we've done is we've added additional info so that our reader knows a little bit more about our neighbor. Additionally, as I was mentioning before with renaming the subject, now we not only know that he's our neighbor, but we also know that he is the deli manager. And so we get that extra information. We get additional naming for who that subject is. Now, when we talk about appositives, there's two main types of appositives that you need to know. The first is a restrictive appositive, and this is an appositive that identifies something, so it adds necessary information to the sentence. The other type is non-restrictive, and this is a commenting type of appositive. And what that means is that it adds extra or unnecessary information to the sentence. So if we go back to identifying appositives or restrictive appositives, these appositives identify the subject for us. So we have to have them in order for the sentence to make sense. On the other hand, our non-restrictive appositives or our commenting appositives are appositives that just add an extra comment or an additional piece of information, and therefore they are not necessary for the sentence. Now, the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive is going to be very important to us when we talk about punctuation. So it's important that you remember that restrictive means that it's necessary information. Non-restrictive means that is extra or unnecessary information. Here are some examples. A restrictive appositive, so an appositive that conveys information that is necessary to the sentence, is our friend Blaine works as an EMT in the mountains. Now, without Blaine, without that appositive there, Blaine is our restrictive appositive. Without that piece of information, we would not know which friend we were talking about. And so having Blaine's name in this sentence is necessary so that our reader knows which friend is actually the EMT. Therefore, this appositive, this extra piece of information, is restrictive. It's necessary. It adds important information to the sentence that is vital to us as the readers understanding what the sentence says. On the bottom, though, we have a non-restrictive appositive. The judge's husband, Maury, stays home with the kids. Now, in this situation, we've done the same thing. We've still just added a name to the sentence. But with our non-restrictive appositive, with the name Maury, this is extra information because we can assume that the judge only has one husband. I mean, hopefully, right? And so in that case, we don't need to know the husband's name in order to understand who the author is talking about. So in our first sentence, our friend Blaine works as an EMT in the mountains. If we just said our friend works as an EMT in the mountains, that is still a complete sentence, but we don't know which friend we're talking about. So that's necessary information. On the bottom, the judge's husband stays home with the kids. We can cut the name Maury out of that sentence. And first off, the sentence still makes sense. It's still a complete sentence. But more importantly, we still know exactly who is being discussed. And so the name in this case is extra information. Therefore, we have a non-restrictive appositive. So just one more time, restrictive appositive is information that we need in order to understand what the author is trying to convey to us. Non-restrictive appositives are just extra information that add extra details that benefit us as readers, but aren't necessarily necessary. Now, with all of that said, the whole reason that we talked about restrictive and non-restrictive appositives was so that we could talk about how to punctuate them correctly. And this is the important part, because as we write in English, our punctuation is going to change based on whether it's a restrictive or non-restrictive appositive. Now, with non-restrictive appositives, so the extra information, What we are going to do is we are going to offset those with commas or dashes. So we can see in this example sentence, the judge's husband, Maury, stays home with the kids. In this sentence, our appositive is surrounded on both sides by commas. So basically the gist is this. If you add extra information into a sentence, if you add a non-restrictive appositive into a sentence, then you need to have commas on both sides of that extra information, or commas on both sides of that non-restrictive appositive. Additionally, though, you can also use dashes. So if you have a non-restrictive appositive, again, if you are adding extra information into a sentence, you can punctuate that with commas like we saw here, but you can also use dashes, which work essentially the same way. They just add a little bit more emphasis. So if you want to emphasize that extra information, if we really wanted to emphasize Maury's name here, then we would put dashes on either side. Typically, though, commas are most common. However, when you see those dashes, that means emphasis, and they're doing the exact same job. Now, that being said, when we talk about punctuation, we do not add commas or dashes to restrictive appositives. We just put the restrictive appositive right into the sentence. So again, we have the same two examples here, but on the top, we have our appositive that does not have commas or dashes around it. And then on the bottom, we do have commas around our appositive. So all of that being said, the key takeaway for today is that an appositive is extra information in a sentence. Some appositives are called restrictive. And if they're restrictive, that means that they add necessary information to the sentence to help clarify who we are talking about. Now, if we have a restrictive appositive, that means that we should not put commas around it. On the other hand, though, there are non-restrictive appositives, and non-restrictive appositives add unnecessary information to the sentence. So we could take a non-restrictive appositive right out of the sentence, and we would still have all of the information we need to know exactly who we are talking about. In those situations, we do need commas on both sides of the appositive. So with our non-restrictive appositives, we're going to put commas or dashes around that extra information to show that it's extra. Now, today we've talked about appositives. We've also talked about how to punctuate them. Just remember, our non-restrictive means extra. We throw commas around those. Our restrictive means necessary. We do not put commas around those. Thank you so much for watching today.